Good day, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to today's webcast entitled Marketing Experts Tell All, Content Messaging Trends for 2016. Today's conversation is brought to you by PR Newswire and powered by Onstream Media. To submit a question or comment, please click on the Ask a Question button on the bottom of your screen. Simply type your message into the box and click on the Submit button. Keep in mind, all questions will be answered during the last 15 minutes of today's event. Alternatively, you can join the conversation on Twitter by using the hashtag ContentTrends2016. At this time, it is my pleasure to turn the floor over to your host, Victoria Harris, VP of Strategic Communications and Content at PR Newswire. Victoria, the floor is now yours.
Thank you, and welcome, everyone. And I'd like to start off by introducing our very esteemed speakers today. Both of them experts in content marketing. First, Rebecca Lieb is a strategic advisor, research analyst, keynote speaker, author, and columnist. Her areas of specialization are digital marketing and media with a concentration in content strategy, content marketing, and converged media. She works with many of the world's leading brands on digital marketing innovation. Clients range from startups to nonprofits to Fortune 100 brands and regulated industries including Facebook, Home Depot, Nestle, Anthem, Adobe, Honeywell, DuPont, Fidelity, Gannett, IBM, Save the Children, Pinterest, Cisco, ad and PR agencies. You are a busy woman, Rebecca.
You're overstating it, but I am rather busy, and thank you so much for having me here today.
Oh, it's wonderful to have you here. And our other speaker, Terry Young, who is CEO and founder of Sparks and Honey. He works with Fortune 500 art organizations and startups to track the subtle shifts in innovation that can lead to industry disruption through new product and service design, internal innovation, design and brand innovation. He identifies trends that disrupt global consumers, reshaping organizations and industries. His most recent work looks at the impact of the crowd economy. I love that term. The shift away from closed-door business to an era of open and transparent business, the rise of Generation Z and how they are wired to collaboration, and the ways to connect and market to the emerging modified class. Terry's a sought-after commentator on trends and will shape the future, and his views are often featured in the New York Times, Fast Company, and Forbes. Welcome, Terry.
Thank you, Victoria. I'm really excited to be a part of the webinar today.
It's exciting to have both of you, and your resumes leave me speechless, and that is why I tripped over so many words. So our agenda today, everyone, we're going to cover content trends. Let me forward the slide here. And forgive me, I did not have it on our presenters as I stated that. So we are going to cover content trends, the channels for publishing, do's and don'ts, multi-channel content promotion, metrics and data, always an important topic, tapping into mainstream culture, and what is engaging people today. So I'd like to start with going over a couple of stats. The Content Marketing Institute did a survey end of 2015, and for B2B marketers, what they found was that 48% say they have a content marketing strategy, but it's undocumented. 32% have a documented plan, and the rest either don't have a plan or they're not sure, and perhaps that may be the scariest one. B2C marketers only fare slightly better, with 37% having an actual documented plan. 44% say they have a plan, but it's not documented. And I don't think anyone would disagree that having a goal without a plan will probably result in a lot of wasted time and effort. So with that, I'd like to hand things over to Rebecca.
Thanks a lot, Victoria. So when we were planning this webinar, you shot over a bunch of questions to both of us and asked them to address them. And I don't have the questions written on these slides, but these slides are, in effect, my answers to your questions.
Great.
And the first question that you posed was, who should run content at a company? And that's an excellent question. And because content is a relatively new discipline in terms of the function of digital marketing and advertising, that the answer is relatively nebulous. There has been a lot of discussion in the content community and a lot of advocacy for hiring chief content officers, for hiring an executive with cross-departmental purview to be responsible for all content produced internally, externally, to keep an eye on that ball and to keep the wheels and machinations of content flowing, which I agree is an excellent idea. But in the real world, that's not happening, and it's not happening for reasons that, are pretty obvious. The likelihood of any organization talking their board of directors into hiring a new C-level executive and all the time and expense and organization that entails is pretty darn unlikely for most companies. So I set out to research, and all of my responses are based on my published research around content marketing and content strategy. And my research identifies 6 different ways that companies are organizing for content in the real world. There is, as you'll see on the bottom, this cross-functional content chief, this, for lack of a better term, because the title does vary, the chief content officer. But more frequently, we're seeing groups of people being charged with running content. The only other individual is a content lead. This is typical of companies that have somebody with the title editor-in-chief or VP of content. They're responsible for content, but only within a marketing function, not more broadly in the enterprise. What we do, however, see are content centers of excellence. We see editorial boards within companies. We even see executive steering committees that get together to coordinate content activities, make sure that workflow isn't being duplicated or reduplicated, to share assets, and really ensure that investment, time, money, staff, and personnel are working smoothly. A very few companies have actual departments or divisions in-house that create high volumes of content. But I think one of the reasons that we see PR Newswire involved in this webinar and commpro is because most often the call for some sort of organization or discipline around content comes from one or two places, either the PR communications function of a company or the social media division. And the reason for that is very, very simple. These are the organizations that are charged with creating the most content on the most regular basis. They're the people who are feeding a very hungry beast. But I've done a little bit of additional research on this topic, which is not just where should content be managed from, but also where does content come from in an organization. And overwhelmingly, we're finding that it comes from the various marketing departments indicated in this slide in purple, communications, social media, PR, marketing, etc. But content is also being created by and needs to flow across all public-facing aspects of an organization. And this can include, depending on the organization, the sales staff, the C-suite, very often research and development, recruiting and retention, the personnel department, very often finance, IT, legal. Content is sort of an oil that lubricates this machine, this flow of information, not just to your marketing constituents, but across all touch points with vendors, suppliers, customers, partners, etc. So content is actually something that's much bigger than just marketing alone. Your second question, Victoria, was what should we measure when we're talking about measuring the efficacy of content marketing? And one of the things that I'm finding is that companies are using content metrics to measure sales as a primary metric and a primary KPI, but there's so much more that they can measure in addition to sales. And I'm not talking about volume metrics such as likes and shares that are pleasant and maybe helpful that have no actual ROI value. But content can be used to measure these 6 points of a compass, which I developed with my colleague Susan Ettlinger, an expert in data and analytics, that actually can be measured in dollar value and communicated back to your CMO or even your CFO to prove the value of your content. So just taking, for example, the value of customer experience, I'll give you one very tangible example. Sony Europe found that their call center was being deluged with calls about a very simple matter that customers were having with one particular television model. It was a very easy question to address, but every time a customer called the call center with this question, it cost Sony €7, which is roughly $7, to handle the call. They wrote one paragraph of content, which was read online 42,000 times in the first 2 weeks that it was up. If you multiply 42,000 by 7 for that €7, you quickly realize that in 2 weeks, Sony achieved some $350,000 in cost savings through one paragraph of content that it literally didn't even cost them money to create. And this is just one of a myriad of examples why I'm trying to encourage organizations to think of KPIs, key performance indicators, beyond just sales that they can address to prove the value of their content marketing initiatives. And guess what you get back in return? You get more resources to create and manage content. You also, Victoria, asked us about paid, owned, and earned media, where content fits in that framework. This is from research that I conducted with my former colleague Jeremiah Aoyang on how paid, owned, and earned media are beginning to converge and creating new forms of media. Content is what we define as owned media. Content marketing in its purest form appears on media that an organization either owns or largely controls. But as this very simple Venn diagram should indicate, you really can't play in any other medium unless you have content to feed it. I'm very fond of saying content is the atomic particle of all marketing. Social media is, social platforms are just containers for content. Email, containers for content. In advertising, we call content creative, probably because it's more expensive, but really creative is a fancy pants word for content. And we're also seeing paid and owned and earned converge to create new forms of content. So, for example, I define native advertising as content marketing plus paid media. So, again, it's content merging and morphing into new forms of promotion. And stay tuned for more of this to happen as new platforms, new technologies, and new channels emerge to play with content in new and exciting ways. We were also asked, and I'm curious as to how Terry's going to address this, about channel strategy and which channels should marketers be concerned about using in 2016. And my answer on that one is the great big fat, marketing cop-out question, it depends. There are a lot of channels out there, and they're changing all the time. Some platforms are dying, new ones are constantly being introduced. Some are paid, some are owned, some are earned, and some are converged. And it's very difficult to answer this question today, and even if I could, the answer is probably going to change tomorrow. When I polled marketers and asked them what their two biggest needs in content marketing were, the ability to find and target an audience online was tied for first place. So as you can see from this really long graph of available channels, this is going to be a constantly evolving question, and like fingerprints, no two marketers are going to have exactly the same answer to address what their channel needs are going to be. I can promise you, though, that most marketers will need to play in multiple channels. And finally, you asked me for 6 content predictions for 2016, and I hope we can discuss these more deeply at the end. But one thing I'm looking at is the evolution of the content stack. That's content marketing software. We are seeing very big players like Adobe and Oracle and IBM start to make acquisitions in this space and integrate solutions. We're starting to see consolidation among the smaller players. So just this week, Scribble Live, for example, announced that it acquired Visually. And so get ready for a lot of point solutions merging into more end-to-end solutions across 8 different content workflow scenarios. We're going to see more content-focused executive roles. I think we're going to see a slight shift in those 6 work groups I identified in the first slide. We're going to see companies finally identify content strategies. My research is pretty congruent with that of the Content Marketing Institute. 76%-ish of companies still don't have documented content strategies. That means we're in early days, much like social media 10 years ago, where organizations were saying, we need a Facebook page with absolutely no rhyme or reason behind what they were going to do with it. We will definitely see that change this year. Content measurement will become more robust and meaningful. It's going to go beyond sales and volume metrics into measuring things that matter to an organization beyond just sales and volume. Global content is becoming a thing. More and more companies are talking to me about working with them, and I'm doing several engagements in this regard right now to develop global content strategies for their businesses. And these are companies that a year ago, 2 years ago, were looking for just a domestic U.S. content strategy. But multinational conglomerates, enterprises are realizing the importance of sharing assets, sharing work, and sharing ideas across teams, while at the same time taking the time to culturally adapt them for individual markets and territories. And finally, content is moving beyond screens. I'm beginning to do a lot of work in omnichannel and multi-channel marketing. What happens in a world filled with beacons and sensors and smartwatches and other devices that are going to create and share and use content beyond just marketing purposes and beyond the screens of our cell phones and our desktop computers. This to me is a very, very exciting, if somewhat over the horizon area that I've got a very, very close eye on. And with that, I'm very, very curious as to what Terry's going to present here.
Well, Rebecca, thank you. That was a lot of great information. And before we move to Terry, if you don't mind, I want to ask you a question, and partially for selfish reasons, because I was writing on this topic yesterday, and I'd like to get your input. So you talked earlier about metrics that matter, and the type of thing you want to report to your CEO. Your CEO doesn't really care how many likes you got. However, my question is, but what are the metrics that you don't necessarily want to report up, but that inform what you're doing, the content you're creating?
So that's a very good point. Things like likes and shares are volume metrics that don't necessarily have ROI value, but they can be very strong indicators to the team of what sort of content is resonating, what you need to create more of, what's working and what isn't. And a lot of very mature organizations are using those types of affinity and volume metrics to determine what content is going to become more refined, what content is going to become more developed, and most importantly, what content is going to be invested in more heavily. We used to see advertising creative kind of rule all campaigns and marketing initiatives, largely because advertising is the most expensive thing that you can invest in. Media buys cost a lot of money. Now we're seeing this equation kind of turn itself on its head. Companies are floating out content, effectively running it up the social and owned media flagpoles and seeing who salutes. The content that gets voted up most highly, that achieves its means and addresses what its audience wants the most, is that content that's then finally invested in and turned into advertising campaigns. So advertising content or creative becomes the last stop on this content continuum rather than the first stop. And these volume metrics can help make that determination.
Oh, wow. Great information. And I think I may quote you if you'll allow me in my blog post.
I'd be honored.
Terry, welcome. And we've had some great information so far from Rebecca, and we're very anxious to get your input on content marketing and messaging.
Fantastic. Thank you, Victoria. Rebecca, that was awesome. First of all, I want to say thank you to PR Newswire and CommPro for getting Sparks and Honey involved. We're really excited about sharing our perspective. One thing that we always think about when we're looking at content and what is best-in-class content and where content is going is understanding what's happening in the world. At the heart of creating good content is being anchored by where the world is going. And that's why, on this slide, you see at the top it says cultural relevance. And making content relevant is really, our belief, is the cornerstone of making content impactful. If we know what humans are thinking and how humans are behaving, that allows us to create something that is emotional. It allows us to create something that is meaningful in the marketplace. And, I think we've lived in a world for probably 5 years or so where we have been caught up in a place of reactive content making. We watch what's happening, we jump on the next thing without necessarily making it completely relevant, nor having the cultural permission to create those conversations with consumers. And so when you think about being culturally relevant, there's three things that I would suggest that are extremely important. One is that there's a lot of data out there. There's a lot of things that are happening in the world, which is why content and data are so closely connected. And we need a system to take the unstructured world at large and translate it into a structured world so that we can make sense of it. So that's kind of step number one. Step number two is once we have it into that system, we have to be able to bucket what we're seeing in the world into some kind of framework. And so a framework is required to make sense of culture. And then lastly, you have to have a mechanism to talk about what's happening in culture on a regular basis. At Sparks and Honey, and you see the photo here, and I put this up just to illustrate, we come together every single day and talk about what's happening in culture so that we can apply it to the content we create for our clients. But if you do it randomly, then those little signals of culture look random. If you do it daily, which is the key here, then you begin to pick up on subtle cues that allow you to differentiate your content and get out of the space of being completely reactive or building these reactive social media newsrooms. So with that premise of cultural relevance, we said, what are some of those things that are going to shape content in 2016, how can we bubble up some trends to give everyone on the call on the webinar some actionable things that you can use in creating your content? The first thing I'll tell you, and this is a list of 100 trends that we see shaping the world in 2016. We produced this report, launched it in November. You can download it for free. It's on Compro site or it's on SlideShare. And it's a great starting point. It's a great way to read the trends and think about, if I'm building content for my particular brand or for someone else's brand, where's the world going and how do I tap into that zeitgeist? On your behalf today, I decided to curate some of those and kind of give you a little bit of a VO on some of the trends that we see that are going to be the closest in to shaping content. So the first one is a concept that you can go online and you can Google Cardistry. And the idea here is very simple. It's people who have perfected a certain talent. It's the slight movement of hands and working a deck of cards, and they're taping their perfect performance and they're putting it out into the world. Now, this is somewhat fringe. It is has a very specific fan base and following. What it ladders up to is a very big premise, and that is the idea that there is a concept called tedious content. And tedious content has been exploding over the last 12 to 18 months. And tedious content is born out of this space that we need to find places to detox from the fast-paced, always-on social media world that has been shaping our lives. That if everything is 140 characters, how do we slow down? How do we move away from snackable media and find a space that allows us to take a deep breath? So when we talk about tedious content, we talk about spaces like finding balance. We talk about the rise in meditation and being centered. We talk about how we find this inward place that allows us to get lost in the content for a long period of time, right? Cardistry is one example. The next slide is a second example, and this is something that probably many people that are on this call have become familiar with in the last 12 months, and that is the idea of adult coloring books. It says coloring books here, but this is really adult coloring books, and it's been all the rage with Gen Zers as well as millennial mothers, and it's even expanded in mainstream now, and we've seen product packaging that's even adopted adult coloring book aesthetics. But again, this is a physical representation of what's happening in Cardistry. In Cardistry, we're seeing content digitally. This is content that is in the physical world, but all around the same premise of slowing down, finding balance, getting to a meditative state, and it ladders up to a big content trend that we think of as tedious content. So very, very interesting. People are already, I would say for at least 12 months, been experimenting significantly with it online. It's now bleeding into offline, and there's real value for many brands to tap into this category. The third trend is kind of something interesting and ideological for us to think about when we think about building content, and that is, for almost a decade, we've lived in a world that we have this fear of missing out, that we are creating a social currency around us in the kind of content that we create, whether it is the content of the individual, so user-generated content, or it's the brand in this manicured way, camera-ready space that we want the world to see us and to experience us. Now, people have created a dual persona. One persona that is their online life, and one persona which is their real life. And when you show up in real life, there's the authentic you. There's the real you, which is harder to manicure in the same way that we can with the tools that we have online. So it's a really interesting space for brands and organizations to think about, that consumers have this cultural tension. They have a tension between being online in a perfect manicured world and being offline and being the real us. And I like to think that in the center of this is authenticity and showing up and showing your real self. And I think this is a great challenge for many organizations. Do we portray our brand as the fairy tale, or do we portray our brand as the truth? And give you a glimpse into the reality behind the brand. And so a very interesting space for content development. The next trend is mood marketing. And this is an evolution in thinking about the kind of data that we can capture and the sophistication of algorithms that can use that data. So if we've lived for several decades in a world of transactional data, which we've used for direct marketing and many other types of marketing, we quickly in the 2000s moved into social media marketing, and we're kind of putting a stake in the ground and saying now we're moving into mood marketing, because now algorithms are sophisticated enough by leveraging sensors that are around us to begin to measure consumers' moods. Are you happy? Are you sad? Are you frustrated? And based on those moods, we can then create new content types. So we're working with a startup here in New York called Emosia, as an example, and they are a group of neuroscientists that have built a series of algorithms that basically only use the sensors that are embedded in your phone, and from those sensors, they measure how you feel. Based on knowing how you feel, then we can create different types of experiences. When data becomes more sophisticated, it gives us the opportunity in order to create different types of content experiences and a different content ecosystem. The next trend is what we call raw live streaming. And a good example of this is Beam, which launched this year. But this is the idea that on one side, we have this camera-ready social currency that we need to protect. On the other side, sometimes you just want to be yourself. You want to find, and that's why Snapchat, that is ephemeral and goes away, it allows us to be a little bit more real. And so we talk about this cultural tension space, which is another great place for brands to play in, around aspiration, so the perfect us, and imperfection, the ability to be the person that we really are and be unapologetic about it. We see this playing out in parenting. You think about helicopter parents on one side, which is aspirational, and free-range parenting on the other side, which is letting my kids back out into the world and to discover it again. You see it in beauty, which is this aspirational perfect beauty, and then kind of the real beauty that we've gotten to know via Dove. And so this playing out in the way we think about content, and how do we as brands bring down the walls and show the real us? How do we show the way we make the donuts? How do we show the way we actually create things? It's really the provenance of the brand. Or another thing that we talk about is the process as entertainment. And those things allow for us to see the peaks, the valleys, the warts, but also the beauty of how a brand actually lives as an authentic organism. The next trend is really around eSports, and we have Twitch TV. Probably everyone on this call is familiar with the platform Twitch, which is the platform that allows us to watch other people play video games. We've seen the meteoric rise of eSports, and we track it for many major Fortune 500 brands. But what I like the most about eSports is that it is challenging the formula of entertainment, therefore challenging the formula of content. And I'll give you some examples. When I log into Twitch, I'm basically looking for exclusive insider information. I want to see those next plays that someone's making. I can apply the idea of getting exclusive insider information to any kind of content, right? Second thing is it has simultaneous HD real-time chat and video. So I'm chatting with the person playing the game, I'm chatting with the community, and I'm watching gameplay in real time. This idea of content experiences that are multidimensional and that have multiple communities interacting at one time, or tribes as we call them, is a second piece of the evolution. The third is kind of covered in the last, in that it's three-way interaction, right? So it's not just observation. I'm now going back and forth with interaction. The fourth is that eSports has taken, and Twitch in particular, has taken a page out of YouTube's book and has embraced the concept of the rise of new Hollywood. New stars that are emerging out of the space. So just as we have YouTube stars, we have Twitch stars. And these amateur stars become aspirational figures for the millions of other people who are watching them every day, which ultimately shapes the way we think about who we collaborate with in order to build content experiences. And lastly, the thing that eSports challenges and Twitch challenges as it relates to content is this multi-layered storytelling. That I can watch a game and it's going to unfold in different ways every single time, which creates a completely unique entertainment experience. So when you think about that formula, it's an amazing formula to digest, because I think it can be applied to all kinds of different content types. And the last trend that I will touch on is the rise of VR and AR. And I know we had a question that Rebecca went through on channels. I agree 100% that the question on channels is all about what's right for the individual brand, right? So we work with, many different brands, and we align channels based on their specific goals. With that said, there are many areas that we're exploring that we think are going to shape the future, and VR, augmented reality, virtual reality are two of those. And the key here is that it is a completely different storytelling experience. We are now tapping into empathy. I can now experience a player or a fan can experience a performer or so forth and so on, and you see it from their perspective. And once we've changed the screen and the way we interact with content, and it becomes empathetic and becomes very highly emotional, it is going to give us, number one, there's going to be new tools that are created, but new methods of storytelling with content that's going to be created. So it's a very fascinating space as we think about immersive experiences. We've even talked about how VR and AR are going to completely reshape retail. We also look at how VR and AR living rooms are going to be the new architectural design. So as opposed to having the big screen TV, I now have an experience that I have with VR, which changes the way we think about designing our homes. And if you're thinking about content, you can set up for building content that is geared toward the future. So those were a couple of curated trends that we pulled from our A to Z report. I would suggest to you that there are, I think I skipped one slide there, that if you are super interested in tracking the trends, there's an app called N Squared, and you can find it on the App Store. It's basically we push unique trends out on a daily basis, again, completely for free, and it's a great way to keep your finger on the pulse of what's going to shape content.
I'm glad you brought that up, Terry, because someone actually just asked also the question. You mentioned the Honey Trend Report, and they want to know where they can get that. I'm assuming on your website?
Yeah, so I'll give you 3 places to go. So the report that I pulled the trends from is called A to Z Culture Glossary. It's an annual report. You can find it on SlideShare and search Sparks and Honey. We have a channel on CommPro, and you can find that report there. Secondarily, if you go to reports.sparksandhoney.com, we have a bunch of new reports that we've launched that are on very, very provocative topics. They tend to be things that are really going to open your mind in big ways. One launched today called Unmoney. And then the last is a free app that you can download if you have an iPhone, and just search for Now Next, and you'll get real-time trends on a daily basis.
Awesome. And I encourage everyone to check out both Terry and Rebecca's websites for more content. But Terry, I wanted to ask you, so earlier you said that good content must be anchored in what's happening in the world. What companies or what brands really stand out to you right now that are actually doing it well?
So many. So I mean, there's many that do it really well, and there's many that aren't even playing in the space. So a couple that are the ones that are quoted very often. One is Red Bull, right? They have leaned into their space. They have complete content studios, and they're creating. So you have a choice. You can ride culture, which is where a lot of people fall, which I think is a mistake. There's sometimes when it works, when you have culture permission. You can shape culture, which is be part of the conversation and you have culture permission to be in it, or you can make culture. And Red Bull is one of those companies that fall on the making culture side. You can look at a company like GE, which is primarily a B2B player, and they've done some fantastic executions around emojis in the way they tell their story with Bill Nye and a few other people. So they've really tapped into the zeitgeist of millennials, understanding the difference between millennials and Gen Z, and created content experiences that are definitely of the moment.
Great, thank you. And I want to, with both of you now, kind of explore a bit. I mean, we've talked about trends. and things that you guys see that, we should be doing. But I'd like to touch a bit on those things that are relics of the past that you would rather people steer away from, and what should they be steering towards. For instance, either one of you want to jump in on content publishing and sharing. What's kind of the dated thinking, and how should people be thinking? Rebecca, you want to take that one? You might be on mute.
Sorry, I muted so that I wouldn't make inadvertent noises over Terry. I'd like to go back to just in terms of content publishing and sharing, that idea that you brought up at the top of the webinar, which is this enormous lack of strategy. And it makes sharing willy-nilly, publishing willy-nilly, everything becomes a stab in the dark unless you have a content strategy tied to it. And a content strategy really is bipartite. It's what do we want to achieve with our content, and then how are we going to achieve it? So first, what's the goal, and then what people, processes, technology, et cetera, do we need to line up to achieve that goal? And Terry just cited two really excellent examples of companies with content strategies that are doing it very well, IBM and GE, even though both are B2B, maybe not as sexy as a Red Bull. And that's because all of their content ladders up to the same idea. With GE, it's eco-imagination, and with IBM, it's the idea smarter planet. Those are both very broad ideas, but they're applicable to the many, many things that both companies as conglomerates do. And once you have that big idea in place, it gets much simpler to figure out where are we going to publish, how are we going to publish, what kind of sharing do we want to encourage, because you've got a strategy in place. And I'll stop harping on strategy and see if Terry has anything to add to that.
Well, I definitely agree. I think, one of the things that we say to clients is that you have to have the right content strategy. You need the right data science strategy, because we live in a world where data is going to be the cues for how we both measure success with content, but how we gather the inputs. And we believe that cultural strategy. And when you have that trifecta of those three elements coming together, that is going to allow you to produce not only great content, but relevant content. And I think that's what Red Bull, it's what GE and many of the leaders in this area are doing extremely well. They know how to not only produce content so that it is highly engaging and shareable, but they also know how to tap into the zeitgeist of culture, and they know how to use data in smart ways in order to fuel what they produce.
Terry, when you speak of tapping into that zeitgeist for a brand to do it authentically, so are there pitfalls? Are there things that could be a mistake in trying too hard, perhaps?
Yeah, so 100%. So here's I'll go back to what I was kind of alluding to on the first slide, that the idea that I am going to set up a social media newsroom and I'm going to watch for news-oriented things that pop, that create incredible buzz and velocity in the marketplace, and then I'm going to ride them, is a flawed premise from my standpoint, in that when you do that and you have not built cultural permission, you very easily can look inauthentic. And that is where many brands, so we map brands, and we basically go in and say, okay, look at how this brand used emojis, look at how this brand used memes, look at how this brand used different types of language and hashtags, so forth and so on. And you can see the brands that are able to understand where culture is in the moment, and ones that are misaligned to culture. And then the second piece is that they have a mechanism that they've created culture permission, that they're not trying to ride every single thing that pops up, because brands are not news organizations. Brands are authentic, living, breathing elements that we have to connect to things that are meaningful, right? And so I think it's very easy to do it to not do it well when you don't have the right kind of content team and strategy in place.
Rebecca, let me ask you first on the social media. What is it that is dated, and how should we be approaching it?
I think what's really dated is approaching social media as channels. Everybody's on Facebook, so we need to be on Facebook. Everybody's on Twitter, so we need to be on Twitter. It's not always a good idea to just jump in with both feet until you have, and I keep harping on this, A, a strategy, and B, a sustainable plan in place to keep that initiative going. We saw this problem emerge back in the days of print-only content, when a company would decide to launch a newsletter and give it their all, and issue 1 was fantastic, but then there was that white page phenomenon when it came to issue number 2 and issue number 3. What are we going to say? How are we going to say it? Who's going to do it? Terry just said something a moment ago that I take slight issue with. He said brands aren't newsrooms, which is very true. They're not. But the difference is that they're forced today to act like newsrooms because they have so many content initiatives going. In fact, brands like American Express, like IBM, like GE are literally publishing more content today on a daily and weekly basis than Time Magazine was during its heyday. So brands really are challenged to tackle these new channels. So what do you want to use social for? Is it going to be a vehicle that's going to drive people to your own owned media channels? Is it going to be a place where you're going to engage customers, prospects, partners, and friends? Is it going to be a channel in which you advertise? Because social is a form of converged media. It can contain all kinds of different content, paid, owned, and earned. So you can't just say social, ? You have to really, really parse it out into a lot more complicated questions. And these levels of complexity are happening across the board.
And what I'm hearing, too, is like content marketing, social deserves a plan and a strategy.
Absolutely. You have to feed it with content.
Terry, do you have anything to add on that?
I would just say on the newsroom side of things, just for a clarification there, the idea of brands as publishers that is where we have arrived, right? We have so many brands, and I think Rebecca's exactly right, that's producing more content than an average publisher does. It's incredible. At the same time, newsrooms tend to see things that are breaking news, and just because it's the zeitgeist of culture or the zeitgeist of mainstream consumers, that they report on it. And I think sometimes there have been certain brands that just because it falls into that category, they think they should ride it. And that isn't always in the best interest of the brand. And that's when you end up having brand fails as it relates to acting like a publisher, that you don't have cultural permission, or you haven't. And I think someone asked this question, so I'll elaborate on it here. How do you build cultural permission? Most brands that are doing it well build cultural permission by small bets, that they go out and they do small little tests in the marketplace. And I loved what Rebecca said early on about, content experiments, content that does really well through a series of KPIs ends up being the next big campaign. That's the concept, that you have to start putting your foot in the water. You have to engage with those consumers. You have to create with them and produce together, and that gives you the ability to, when something really does become an opportunity, that you can ride that wave or co-create that wave together. But if you can't just jump in out of the blue.
Let's switch over to the measurement question, and I know you've both touched on measurement, but I think it's one of those topics that a lot of people are struggling with. I'm thinking about a couple of years ago, I met the CMO of a very large company, and she told me she weekly was getting a lot of beautiful reports, lots of metrics, lots of, colorful graphs. And she said, but what she was finding is that very little of it was actionable. So I'd like your input on what is it that is dated and how should we be approaching what we measure and what we report. Rebecca, you want to take it first?
So there are so many things to measure and report that are going to convey value, but that marketers haven't really thought of. I gave the example of Sony Europe saving $350,000 in 2 weeks with one post to its community site. Another example was Unilever implementing the right collaboration software so that teams across the world could work in concert and work with vendors and work with agencies. Unilever, across 3 of their many hundreds of brands, realized $10 million in savings by just implementing the right content tools. We're also seeing companies use content to crowdsource ideas and get new products to market faster and with more crowdsource type vetting. We're seeing companies refine business models with content. I've got a wonderful case study of a brand that moved its offline business online through a YouTube channel. But again, you have to be able to measure these initiatives and think more creatively about measurement than perhaps you've been thinking, because marketing is charged primarily with selling stuff. There's also things like sales enablement. ESPN launched a recruiting site when they moved their business out of Manhattan and into more suburban Connecticut to staff up there with a lot of content around the benefits of working in a completely new work environment. And this attracted a lot of very qualified candidates to join their team. Again, a benefit of content that goes beyond marketing. So it's really thinking creatively about the goals that your organization needs to achieve as an organization, not just as a sales entity, and thinking about how those goals can be addressed with content.
Just adding on to that, Victoria, working with many different large Fortune 500 brands, it's a question that everyone struggles with. And there have been many meetings that I've been in, and we've looked at analytical decks and metrics, and it's just a lot of data and numbers that no one can do anything with. And the less people are able to do something with it, the larger the decks become and the more complicated they become and the less that is done, right? So we see that situation all the time. I think what happens is that we use a whole series of tools that are on the marketplace in order to measure social media and set up KPIs. And when we extract from that, it's very raw. And when things are raw data, it is quite difficult to extract the insights from it. And so the one piece of advice I would give is no matter what KPIs you land on, what dashboards you create, keep it simple and make sure you have someone in your organization that can translate the data points into insights that are useful, because without those, and that to me has been the missing link. I see many companies that have said, okay, we have great, amazing people doing our content strategy, amazing people developing the content. Then we look at the metrics every 2 months from a bunch of people who are only on the data science side, and that can be great, but one of those individuals has to be able to translate it back into human insight, because at the end of the day, we're producing content. It's going to become a new brief. So that would be my thought in that regard.
Okay. Thank you, Terry. And we only have a few minutes left, and I'd like to tackle a couple of the questions that have come in from the audience. We have several for each of you, and we'll share those with you so that anything we didn't get to, perhaps later on Twitter, you could answer more questions. First for you, Terry, you spoke a lot about cultural relevance. Someone is asking, how do you get cultural permission? How does an organization do that? How do you balance pushing the envelope without hiking, appropriating culture? What does this mean for diversity at your organization?
I understood the first part of the question, but what was the last part on diversity?
So how do you balance pushing the envelope without hijacking, appropriating cultural?
Yeah.
Okay,
so I mean, really the answer is something that I was talking about before, and it's around small bets, right? So we can look at some of the things that Amazon's doing, even GE, and we reference them as being very good in content, and Red Bull. They all started many of the initiatives that they have today as small bets. And they went in and they did small tests, whether that was either in small markets or small cohorts, and they tested their way, because you have to think more like a startup, right? This is about iteration. I'm going into market, I'm seeing what sticks, and then I'm willing to fail a little bit and correct and course correct. And you can do that in content marketing. There's still a lot of corporate fear, which prevents some corporations or organizations to embrace that process. But if you can embrace a small bet, kind of iterative approach, I think that is the best way to build cultural permission.
Okay. And Rebecca, we have one here for you. Can you explain content stack? Is it the various styles or types of content utilized in conjunction?
Great question, and I didn't have a lot of time to dig in on this earlier. So I did deep research on the content marketing software landscape. Right now that's comprised of about 250 different vendors, and it's a very jumbled stack. Different tools do different things. And in the research, we identified 8 different work group scenarios of content. I always leave 1 or 2 out when I name them off the top of my head, but one was creation, one was distribution and publishing, finding audience and targeting, metrics, governance, legal and compliance, and so on. Right now, most content solutions address maybe up to 4 or 5 of those, generally only 1 or 2 of those necessities in terms of content production, distribution, measurement, et cetera. But we are seeing a lot of consolidation in this space, and the software companies teaming up, partnering, some of the big companies like Adobe and Oracle, buying other companies and incorporating them into their already existing stacks. So I predict that we're going to see by the end of this year an end-to-end content stack. And I believe that the content stacks are also going to incorporate social media software. And the content stacks are going to talk to the advertising stacks, which already exist, that encompass all the tasks necessary to serve, manage, create, and measure digital advertising. And I think that this content stack talking to the ad stack is what the marketing cloud is going to be in the future. Everybody talks about the marketing cloud, but nobody really defines it. So that's a great big technology answer to close on. But I got research on that you can download from my website, no registration, nothing, so I'm not being promotional. Just go there and help yourself.
No, I was about to say both your websites have a lot of great information, and they're on the screen now, and it'll be on the slides that our audience can download. So visit both those websites. I'm afraid we've come to the end of the hour. I want to thank you both so much. This has been a terrific conversation. I encourage our audience to share insights on Twitter. And I want to thank all of you who joined us today. It's been a great conversation, and best wishes on your content planning, everyone.
Thank you so much for having us, and thanks everybody who joined.
Thanks.